Now, NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio with Lee Witting, whether you're listening on TalkZone, by podcast, through the archives of our ad-free shows on our YouTube channel, or connected through the incredible content of our Facebook page. Our guest today, David Bennett, was chief engineer on the research vessel Aloha, a commercial diver and underwater researcher, when he was caught in a violent storm while in a rubber Zodiac off the California coast one night in 1983. A huge wave broke the Zodiac, and Dave drowned into a near-death experience where he met beings of light, relived his life, and saw into his future. The experience resulted in the beginning of a lifelong shift in his understanding of life on Earth. He experienced a second transformative experience in 1994 while meditating in the Red Rocks of the Sedona, Arizona area near his childhood home. And a third experience occurred in November 2000 when he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer that metastasized into his spine, causing his spine's collapse. He survived once again, aided by spirit guides, his wife Cindy, and a miracle he attributes to Padre Pio. This close call taught him even more about living, loving, and how to find purpose in his life. David is the author of the book Voyage of Purpose, has lectured at the annual IANDS conference, and has shared his inspirational message with groups across the country. He's appeared on radio and television shows, including Oprah, Dr. Oz, NBC, and PBS as an NDE resource, and his articles appear in numerous magazines, blogs, and papers. Dave Bennett, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for having me on NDE Radio.
It's a pleasure. And
it was an honor for me.
Well, it was a pleasure reading your book, I must say. Dave, some psychic abilities first appeared in you as a child when you developed the ability to look ahead, to scout out bullies and avoid them. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah. I was, I thought it was totally normal. It's kind of funny because I was thrown from one family to the next. So I really didn't have a sense of family. But I in this one family, we started going to school, and I had a friend that lived across the street, and we would walk to school. Back in those days, everybody walked to school. Yes. And and on the way, there were some bullies that would try to get your lunch money, stuff like that, you know. And I didn't want any part of that. And so I didn't realize I used to have these dreams that I could fly, these flying dreams, which are common for a number of kids, you know, before that part of our brain, you know, hardens up. But anyway, I had these flying dreams, and I knew that I could kind of bilocate and look ahead to see where the bullies were. And I thought everybody could do it. I just thought that the people that were caring for me at that stage of my life just didn't say anything about it or didn't tell me. So I wasn't going to tell anybody else that I already knew. I was, you know, the child mentality, right? But I could look ahead and I could see where they were. And so then my friend and I, we would walk to school. We had a couple different options of how we could get there to school, different streets. Mm-hmm. And so we would take an alternative route, and we were able to, you know, kind of skirt around those bullies.
Wow.
I would say almost 99% of the time.
Terrific. What a gift. You also had recurring dreams of dying as a child. Tell us about some of those. I think you said in your book, there were 3 that you remember.
Yeah, there were 3 prominent ones that I had. And I had these reoccurring dreams all the way up until my first near-death experience. And then the dream stopped. But in these dreams, I would actually die. The first one was like a rock slide, and we seemed like we were in a pretty primitive life. And we were just walking along this ledge. There was a rock slide, and I was killed during the rock slide. Another one was when I was on a sailing ship, a tall masted sailing ship, wow. And we were boarded. and during the boarding, I was killed. And so these are very short dreams, but very detailed, very rich, just it was really almost hyper real, these dreams. And then the one that was the most prominent, the one that I had the most, was I was training the bulls for the arena. I wasn't a matador, I wasn't a full-fledged matador, but I was helping to train and raise these bulls for the arena. And one of the bulls gored me. Actually, would when he gored me, he would hit me right in my side, about where your kidneys are, and he would flip me right up over his back. And whenever that happened, I would, of course, I was asleep, but every time that bull would gore me, my body would raise up a good, 6-7 inches out of the bed, just boom, every time. And I had those dreams, so I attributed those dreams to a past life. I, I just started. I figured there's got to be some connection there, and that they were possibly past life experiences.
Yeah. They say that it's very unusual to dream of dying, but in past lives, I mean, I have one recurring dream of dying as a medic on a battlefield. That is just the same, short but very vivid.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
I attribute it to past life myself. By the time I was 12, I had the strong knowledge that I was going to die in my mid-20s. Is that a premonition of the NDE?
It may have been. It wasn't a vivid. It was just a knowing. It was just an understanding that I knew. And so my philosophy was, my philosophy as a youth was to cut your swath through life, because like I said earlier, I was kind of thrown from one family to another, and I didn't really feel like anybody was looking out for me.
Mm.
So cut your swath through life. But I also had this feeling that, I wasn't going to live past my mid-20s, that was that was going to be as long as this life was. And and I didn't know, but that's when I had my near-death experience. So
interesting. One other thing before we get to that near-death experience, you had a car wreck in Arizona, wound up in an area I know well, at Cottonwood Hospital, and you went to school in Jerome, which was back then, I guess, was still a hippie hangout, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
It's gotten a lot posher, a lot of money has moved into Jerome. But tell us the story about your being in the canyon chased by a bear.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, we landed in Cottonwood, Arizona, because of this accident that we had on the way. We were actually going down to Tucson, but we had this accident on the road that landed my mom and my stepfather in the hospital in Cottonwood.
Mm.
And so we ended up making a life there in Cottonwood. We just figured, why go any further? And we set down some roots there in Cottonwood, and I made friends. And my friends all thought, we were boys trying to be men, basically. Okay. We were in our teens. We thought we knew everything. And they wanted to go hunting bear, because one of our neighbors had this stuffed bear, taxidermied bear. And we thought, oh, wow, that is so cool. Let's go hunt. Let's go get us a bear. Let's go bag a bear, right? Well, up in Flagstaff, not far, up Oak Creek Canyon and up into the mountains up there, they had bear up there up in those pine woods. And so we took, I borrowed a friend of mine's 30-06, and the other boys, they had their own rifles. And so we were going to go up and hunt bear. In this one canyon, we found a bear sign. And so we thought, okay, let's see if we can drive him down. And so I was in the base of the canyon, and my job was kind of be the driver, the rover, make a lot of noise and try to flush the bear down the canyon, where my friends would be up on the rim, on each rim, and they'd be ahead of me. And I would, and they would be the ones that would shoot the bear. Well, we're going down the canyon, and I noticed that, one of the guys kept falling back, and but he didn't say anything, and I just was trying to keep an eye on my buddies up there on the rim, and I'm making noise, and I don't even I have my gun slung over my shoulder. I don't even have it in my hands, because I figure it's not my job. I'm never going to see the bear because he's going to be way ahead of me, running away. But that's not what happened. Ended up, the bear had had come up along that rim, and the guy that was up on this side, he was tracking the bear, and the bear had gotten behind me and was now following me. And
Wow.
so I heard this, the gruff that they make, that gruff kind of sound,
Yes.
And I'm like,
yes.
Oh no. Uh-oh. And I turn around, and there's the bear. He's right behind me. And I had been making so much noise, I didn't even dream that he'd be right there behind me. Well, I took off. I mean, not in a way that the bear would chase me, but I went off. I started going up the canyon on the other side, yeah. And the guys, they took a couple shots, but they didn't get anywhere near that bear, and none of us did. And but when they finally caught up with me, we had a good talk.
No more bear hunting, I would imagine.
No. That was the end of our bear hunting expedition. But
especially when the bear turns out to be a better hunter than you were.
So. Oh my gosh, he made us look so foolish that day. Yeah, yeah. So we were boys wanting to be men. That's the way I think of that one.
Well, that was a close call, but not so close as the near-death experience. So,
no, that was just a scare. That was
yes, a near-death scare.
Yeah.
So let's begin with your first NDE with the breaking of that Zodiac.
Yeah. So we had actually driven off a 25 to 30 foot breaker. We actually caught some air with the Zodiac, and we landed, and I yelled to the mate to turn us around because being in a breaker zone is not the best, especially in 25, 30-foot seas. You don't want to be there. That's dangerous territory. So I yelled at the mate to turn us around, take us back out to sea where we'd be safer. And just then, suddenly above our head was the next one. The next wave, and it came down on top of us, and it folded the Zodiac right in half.
Wow.
And I was in the bow because I was trying to navigate to try to find our way into the harbor, and it just catapulted me into the ocean. And Lee, I can tell you, that was the most violent experience of my life. I was tumbled and tossed in that ocean like a rag doll. And I was a commercial diver. I didn't freak out because I was waiting for myself, I was waiting for the life vest to bring me up to the surface, but I couldn't tell what was up or down. And this was nighttime as well. So I tried to blow some bubbles out, but everything was chaotic. So I just hung on to the life vest because I didn't dare try to swim. I could be swimming down. Who knows? I may be making it harder to reach the surface. Well, you can only hold your breath so long. And I didn't even get a good chance to grab a gulp of air before I was in the water, So, so I started feeling the sensation. I'm trained as a commercial diver, so we know what oxygen deprivation is. Mm-hmm. And I started feeling those effects, the euphoria and everything. And I started, thinking, this is not a good situation. This is, this could be the end. And you start thinking about regrets, things like that. But eventually the euphoria does take over, and you breathe in salt water, and I drown. But the interesting thing is there's a moment of burning but then immediately popped out of my body. So I would say it really wasn't a lot of suffering, but I found myself in this absolute darkness, and Lee, we call it the void in NDE research. But to me, I had no clue. This was something way beyond my training, as a commercial diver. And to be in this absolute darkness. I had just come from this raging sea, which is incredibly loud. If you've ever seen a sea in that kind of state, it's incredibly loud. And suddenly I'm in this place that's absolutely quiet. And this is on the California coast, and the sea comes down from the north on the west coast. And the water this is in March. It was incredibly cold, and I'm no longer cold. It's quiet. It's peaceful. So I'm curious. I'm like, what's going on? But at the same time, I didn't feel like I was really, truly alone. It felt as though there was a presence with me, but it was, and it didn't feel like it's called a void, absolute darkness, but it felt like it contained everything. It's very hard to describe this feeling.
Yes.
But then I saw a light, and we've all heard stories about the light, but to me, it just felt like there was this pinprick of light which drew my attention, and the next thing I know, I was moving toward it. And as I got closer and closer to it, I saw that it was millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all kind of moving in unison, like if you've ever seen a school of fish, that kind of swim in unison, or a flock of birds when they're migrating, how yes. they all kind of, and then all of a sudden, like they have a single mind, they all move, they all shift direction but these were fragments of light, and they were just multiple colors. It was absolutely beautiful. And I was in awe. I could say I was in like gaga awe of these lights, these fragments of light. And I actually took a moment to try to see myself. And it wasn't like I was moving my head and looking down. It was like suddenly I could look down, and my vision looked down. And when I did, I didn't see so much a body, but I saw light. Okay. I was transforming into one of these fragments of light. And as I got closer and closer, I saw that they were just millions upon millions. It was infinite. And 3 broke away, and they came toward me. And when they did, they welcomed me home. And like I had said earlier, I really didn't have a sense of family or home prior to this. And that feeling of being welcomed home was so rich, so real, that I mean, again, I was in absolute awe, and eventually a dozen of these lights came and greeted me, and I recognized them. I recognized them as a family. And so I call them my soul family, because I knew them. I recognized them as a family. And we eventually went into the light, further into the light. It was a communication. That was a knowing that we needed to move into this area. And it felt to me like a giant bubble, a sphere. And when we were in this sphere, I started to relive my life. But it wasn't like watching a movie. It was more like reliving my life, but not only from my perspective, but from everyone that I'd ever interacted with. It was like my consciousness fragmented into these multiple streams of consciousness, and I could experience it from all these different views all at the same time. It was incredibly humbling. Lee, I can't tell you, it was just incredible to see how every interaction that we have and how it affects others and their perspective of us in that give and take of interactions that we have with everyone in the world. And I saw that, things that I thought were important really didn't have a lot of significance, because every action in there created like these ripples of reaction. And so the things that I thought were important, becoming chief engineer of a research vessel, the things that I had prided myself in, that I had quite a bit of ego about, meant very little. But when you would do something with, with just loving intention, that would create the biggest ripples. And so we went through this experience. And like I said, I was a brash young man. I had that philosophy of cut your swath through life. And so pretty brash and pretty brutal philosophy. It's very self-centered, self-serving type of thing. And so the experiences, a lot of the experiences that I saw, I wasn't, I because my soul family were experiencing this with me in the same way I was. And so I was, I'd have to say almost ashamed that they had to experience this, this side of me, but they didn't. They didn't judge me. They just loved me. They supported me. And we went through this. If anything, they seemed a bit excited to be, going through this experience of reliving my life. Eventually, they got to a point where I was experiencing things that I didn't have a reference to. It wasn't my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually looking into my potential future. And the neat thing is, in the life review, everything was crystal clear. All the actions, interactions, all the ripples, everything was crystal clear. But once I passed that threshold of this life and potential life, it became more like I was looking down a corridor that was very clear, but off on the periphery was a little out of focus. And it gave me the impression that I could go this a little bit to this way, but I'd always come back to that core path. Or I could go a little bit this way and I could go to that core path. And to me, that felt like that's our free will, that we can, we can vary on our life's journey. But I had agreed to certain points in my life's path that I would try to hit. And I went through a few things. And again, it was a little disorienting because I didn't have reference for it, but my soul family just loved me. They supported me. But we finally reached into the future to a certain point, and the light, okay, there's millions upon millions of fragments of light, all spoke in unison. And they said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I said, "No way." No way. I found a family that loves me. I'm feeling love like I've never felt love before. That was the first thing that I experienced before even meeting the soul family, were these waves of love that just felt like they were embracing me in this warm embrace. And so I'm feeling loved. I've got a family that's supportive. And I know that body is cold, and it just seemed cold and dead in the water. And I was aware of the body still in the water. And so I had no desire to go back. So I argued with what I perceived as God. I argued. And the light spoke one more time. And this time it said, "You must return. You have a purpose." And that word purpose just kind of resonated. But because we're in that state of expansive awareness, where you're connected to every soul that was and every soul that will be, that in that expansive awareness, I understood the purpose. And it was so simple and it was so efficient that I immediately came to acceptance. And the moment I reached acceptance of this purpose, I found myself back outside my body, watching it in the ocean. And now I'm watching it still being tumbled into, it had gotten caught in that, the breaker zone where the ocean becomes a cyclical energy. And my body had gotten caught up with that, along with the wreckage of the Zodiac. And the Zodiac bow line had wrapped itself around this arm, and a set of waves hit the wreckage and popped it up because there was still a little bit of air. It wasn't totally shredded. A little bit of air had stayed in one of the pontoons. And so when that bow line kind of tangled up with this arm, it yanked this arm up, and dislocated my shoulder and my thumb, but I didn't feel any of it because I was outside of it watching it. And the three original soul family members that had greeted me were with me. And we just watched as my body was pulled up to the surface and got tangled in all the wreckage. And as the waves were pounding my body up against this wreckage, a little bit of that salt water came up and out. And when it did, my soul family gave me a gentle push, and I kind of vibrated back into my body.
Wow.
It was, and we were still a mile offshore. I heard my buddies yelling for me, but when you're expelling salt water, you don't have much of a voice.
No.
So I tried to squeak and squawk, but one of them had hung on to a flashlight. I mean, talk about miracle of miracles. One of them, and the fact that they had stayed on station all this time in a breaker zone. I mean, these guys were dedicated. And because they were trying to get all our numbers together, and then we'd all swim in together. And they found me, and they swam over to me in the wreckage, and then we made that 1 mile swim into the beach. But I had there were a few things that happened on that swim. I was having a hard time staying on the surface, and I didn't understand why. Well, I did actually, because I still felt like I was half here and half there, and I had that level of expanded awareness that I knew that my life vest. It was an old-fashioned World War II Mae West, one of the big orange puffy pillows, basically, and the lining had dry rotted, and so my life vest had become super saturated with salt water and was actually pulling me down. And the minute that I released it and let it go, I could stay up on the surface and help, hang on with my one good arm and try to scissor kick my way into the surface or into the beach. It was a tough swim, but we all made it. We all made it.
Did you finally suggest to the captain of the Aloha that he get new, more efficient vests?
Yes, we did, actually. We did. I did it quietly, though. I didn't do it like, that life vest killed me. I didn't do that. Because I kind of hid from my experience, Lee. I hid from it for about 11 years. Because my first reaction when I told my first wife at the time, I told her that I died. She freaked out, and so I didn't feel like I could share the experience. And commercial diving back in the 80s was incredibly dangerous work. And we put each other's lives in each other's hands every day. And so it really was a taboo subject. And so I didn't feel like I could share it with my mates. I couldn't share it at home. And so I tried to get on with my life. And Lee, that doesn't happen.
No. I wanted to ask you one thing before we move on, and that is, you write, when I think of God today, it is as a consciousness of light with billions and billions of souls attached to that consciousness. Do you see God as a collective of all of us, or is it something bigger to which we attach ourselves?
Lee, we like to look at things in a linear fashion, right? I mean, because we live in this life and time, we have time, this construct of time that is part of the boundaries of the physicality that we live in. And so we tend to try to put things in categories a lot of times. But yes, I do believe that there's a oneness. There's a oneness that incorporates all of us, because I believe that my single fragment of light, part of it resides within me, but the greater totality of my being still resides in the light. And so, yes, I believe that there's a multitude of all of us, past, present, and future, that are all a part of that light. So, so yes, I guess you would say it was a collective, and but not just of humans, but of everything. It's all kind of woven together with love.
Speaking of which, we went through running away from a bear and the violence of the ocean. Perhaps you could tell us the story about your encounter with Scar, the whale.
Oh, Scar. This was before my near-death experience.
Yes.
while I was the chief engineer of the research vessel. And we were up in Georges Banks off the East Coast, and we were doing a bottom survey of an old munition dump from World War II, where after the war, they had just dumped the munitions out to sea. And we were doing a bottom survey to see the condition of the munitions and and how it was affecting the wildlife and all of that. It was a quite intensive research project that we were doing. But when we got up there, we got on station. We were using a remote operated vehicle, an ROV, and which was on a tether, and it's a small little it's like a swimming robot with lots of thrusters and cameras and all that stuff. And every time that we would try to launch it, the sub crew would try to swim it down. At first it would go in the water in a cage, and then it would come out of the cage, and they would try to swim it down. Well, the minute it disengaged from the cage and started to swim down, there was this female humpback that would try to get underneath it. She was treating it like it was a baby whale, and she was trying to bring it back up to the surface. Well, you can imagine how frustrating that was to the sub crew, that was in this Connex box with their joystick trying to swim this thing down to the bottom, And so I was the chief engineer. When we had a sub in the water, my responsibilities kind of laxed, okay, because I was in charge of everything on the ship. But the sub crew, once they had a sub in the water, they were in charge of, the sub and all of that. When the sub was on the deck, it was my responsibility. And the captain was just keeping us on station. So I didn't have a lot of responsibility once the sub was in the water. So they thought, well, can we somehow, because she would come right up alongside this whale. She would come up alongside and she was so friendly. But we called her Scar because I think her friendliness was her detriment, because you could see where she had been cut by props over and over, and she was just riddled with all these scars. And we didn't really have a great appreciation for this whale. We thought this has got to be the dumbest animal on earth, and we were so naive. We just didn't realize. But they had thought, Dave, why don't you get in the Zodiac again, and go out and because anytime somebody was in the water, she would come up, because we were staying on station and we were in her feeding zone apparently, and so they encouraged me to go out there and see if I could interact with her long enough to distract her so that they could because if we got the sub on the bottom, she left it alone. But so long enough, if we could distract her long enough to get the sub launched. So I would go on one side of the ship and play around until Scar would show up, and then I would interact with Scar, and she would come up alongside the Zodiac and roll a little on her side so that her eye was out of the water. And that eye would look at me, and I swear she was like looking through me. It was an incredible experience. And then many times I would just slide out of the Zodiac into the water with her and just swim with her. And it was enough. She was, interacting with me enough that they would be able to launch the sub on the other side of the ship and swim it down as quickly as possible. And then they'd signal me, and I would get back in my Zodiac and come back to the boat. And we would, and do the survey and everything. Well, like I said, we really thought that was a dumb whale. We didn't have a lot of high regard for her. It was later in life, after my near-death experience, when I started having more spiritual awareness, that I had an encounter with spirit where we were, I do this thing, Lee, where I call it contemplative meditation, where I commune with my, soul family and spirit. I call it spirit. I commune with spirit. And during one of these communions, I kind of relived that experience with Scar, and I realized that Scar was much more evolved than we ever thought. and that she was more curious and she wanted to express her love for us. And she did this by being present with us, you know. And so at the time that I was interacting, I didn't have the awareness to understand the enormity of what she was doing for me. And in the reliving of it, I got to see that she was communicating, that I was communicating to me. There was an exchange of energy there. I felt it, but I didn't understand what it was. It was quite an amazing experience. It's something that that is a part of my life that I cherish now.
I think you say in the book that making eye contact gives you a window into other people.
Yeah, well, I learned when I came back from my NDE, when I would look at someone, horse, animals, people, I would see their light. And, you know, we've always heard the adage, you know, the eyes are the windows of your soul, right? Well, they're the windows into our light. And when I came back from my NDE and I had this ability to see people's light in their eyes, it felt so intrusive to me, because I didn't have permission to see that level of that person, to see their essence, their being, you know. So it was really hard for me at first until I could learn to just shut it off.
I think one of the first indications you'd gotten something from your NDE was your description in the book of, well, you write, I hobbled out of our apartment's complexes to the landscape gardens. I'd never noticed how beautiful they were. I could see the life energy in my surroundings. There was an aura of light around all of the plants and rocks in the planting beds. I could feel and touch them without physically touching them with my hands. Does that stay with you, or is that something that just, you know?
No, when that first happened, it really freaked me out. I was an engineer. I saw pretty much things as black and white, you know, and suddenly I was seeing auras. At the time, I didn't even know what an aura was. I called it life force energies, like described in the book there. But yeah, the gardens, because this is Southern California where we were living, and the gardens there, you know, they had all kinds of flora and fauna and palm trees. Oh my God, palm trees have this amazing aura around them. And I started seeing this right after the NDE, and I thought, oh man, I really flipped a wig here. I didn't see it before. Now I'm seeing it afterwards. You know, did I take a severe whack in the head while I was in the ocean there or something? And so I was concerned, but also I wanted my old life back. But these auras were incredible. People, plants, even rocks. You could see this energy that was a part of everything. And I can still now I've learned to kind of, because I asked for my old life back, and eventually I was able for it to tone down. It took time, and and my wife at the time, and my current wife now, even, you know, sometimes I will be doing something and suddenly I'll see this beautiful aura, and I'll just stop and no matter what I'm doing, I'll stop talking and everything, and I'll just kind of gaze over at this. But my current wife, she understands it. My current wife is a psychic, and she works with the Edgar Casey group and stuff like that. So she understands me, as much as someone who hasn't been there can. She understands me, and so when I go through these pauses of seeing something or communing with spirit or something like that, she gives me the latitude I need.
You comment in the book that you could see Earth as a living, breathing planet, and you don't think that you'd given that much thought to it before. And you say, during my youth in Arizona, some of the Native American grandmothers had shared stories with me about Mother Earth. I didn't really take their lessons seriously about how the Earth grows, expands, and contracts. Now you understand it, huh?
Yeah, the day after the NDE. Remember, the sea is in just a incredibly just so much turmoil with these heavy seas, and a number of the crew, they had lost a lot of their possessions, and so we went back to the beach the next day to try to recover some of their possessions. And I was standing now. This is the storm had carved into the beach to the point that there was this 13-foot cliff of sand because it had eroded that much of the beach. That's how strong the storm was.
Wow.
And so I'm standing on the top of this kind of like, little sand cliff, and I'm looking out to sea. And again, when we come back, we feel like we're still half here and half there. We have so much more awareness available to us that I could feel the earth breathing. I could feel it in and watching, the beauty of this, of the remnants of this storm, and that's what brought me back. Because in my childhood, I was fortunate enough that when we were living in Cottonwood, just outside Sedona, most of my friends were Native American. They had relocated a whole bunch of Native American families into Clarkdale, the city next door, and we were on the outskirts. Our house was right in between the two towns, and so out in the desert. And so a lot of my friends were these Native American kids, and they saw the dysfunction of my life as a kid, and they kind of their grandmothers saw what was going on, and they kind of adopted me, and they tried to share some natural way wisdom with me. And that felt like what they were trying to convey to me, that there's, a living, breathing earth that we belong, that we're a part of, and that we're supposed to walk on her with respect. And so that really, after the near-death experience, we try to figure out what happened, right? And so that brought me back to studying some of the Native American spirituality that they had, bestowed upon me when I was 14,
You mentioned sweat lodges and also a pipe ceremony.
Yeah.
Those two things that you must have adopted from what you learned from them.
Yeah, that was in that study period. I was fortunate enough to find a mentor in Ed McGaw, Eagleman Ed McGaw. He taught me pipe. He gave me my native name, and we did sweat lodge and that sort of thing too, and called Uwepi, calling of the spirits, that sort of thing. It was it helped me to integrate my experience, to follow the path of native spirituality. Really, really helped me quite a bit because I grew up with these kids. I grew up with this culture, and at the time, I really believed that those grandmothers saved my life back then because I was on a pretty self-destructive course, and they settled me down by helping teach me how to do a vision quest when I was like 14, and I met Grandfather Mountain, which really, really taught me that there's something greater to this life than just the survival.
Well, tell us about the Grandfather Mountain.
Yeah, well, I was sitting on this plateau. They had tried to get me to Vision Quest, but because I wasn't a part of their real family, I was just kind of an adopted, you might say adopted, but not officially. But they were looking out for me. So they kind of showed me what I needed to do in order to get in touch with my spirit self. And so at 14, I had my first vision quest. And I fell into it almost accidentally. I had tried and was unsuccessful. But then I'm sitting, there was this little plateau that was out. It was, I don't know, maybe half a mile from the house. And so I would go up there and I could look across the Verde Valley and I could, just see all the way across, all the way to Sedona. I could see across the valley from this plateau at the base of Mingus Mountain. And I would sit there, and this one time I saw there was a sandstorm that was starting and it was marching across the valley. And I was sitting there and I just allowed myself to just kind of like fold into that. And it was almost like I went into the earth and then came back up. It was really strange. And I found myself sitting on this plateau. It was almost like it was almost an out of body experience in many ways, because I knew of myself sitting there, but I also knew what was happening around me. But then there was a presence. And because my back was to Mingus Mountain, it felt like a very dominant male presence. And I called him Grandfather Mountain because he had this deep resonance when he spoke, and he spoke to me and told me that, I need to be true to myself. I need to collect myself, because I was so scattered in those days, and that experience, I mean, it really shook me. It was, and the problem though is that, when you're young like that, you have a quick experience like that and it stays with you, but you gotta make a living, you gotta, social pressures bring you, and so you kind of put it aside. And it wasn't until after my near-death experience that I said, that experience felt more true and more close to what I experienced in the NDE, that so that brought me back into investigating that Native American spirituality. And fortunately, I found a good mentor that taught me, pipe and sweat and all of that.
Yeah. You're right. After my near death, I was given what I call my three gifts: acceptance, tolerance, and truth, which might have been born in that early experience at 14. I mean, that sounds like what you would have gained if only you'd been able to absorb it all at that age.
Yeah, if I could have just taken the time to explore it a little further. You're absolutely right, Lee. That is that was the message back then as well. But those are important things, acceptance of ourself and our circumstances, tolerance of where we find ourselves in life and the people that cross our paths. Allowing people to be who they are, because they're on a life journey as well, and they're making choices that you may not agree with, but they're their choices. And so to be tolerant, acceptance and tolerance, those I was able to integrate rather quickly because of the life review. I learned that in the life review. But the acceptance, tolerance, and then truth was a little harder for my engineer brain to wrap itself around. It was because as an engineer, there's school, there's truth that you learn, there's truth that you experience in life. And those are absolute truths, right? But all of a sudden, I realized that our heart recognizes truths that resonate with us, that are deep-seated within us. And those are our personal truths. And those are, and that is the truth that I was talking about in acceptance, tolerance, and truth, is when we come across a truth that resonates within our heart, that's a signpost. That's something to follow. That's something to grab onto and to pay attention to. So yeah, acceptance, tolerance, and truth, they became my mantra for about 11 years while I didn't share my experience the first 11 years, but I could accept those. That was something that I felt like I could accept. But talking and arguing with God, that was a little hard for me to accept at first. The auras and seeing spirit in people's eyes, that scared the heck out of me. And so I tried to hide from that as well. I got good at hiding though. People would ask me, especially the crew I was with, because they felt, Dave, you were gone for anywhere between 15 to 18 minutes. And as a commercial diver, I knew I could hold my breath. If I hyperventilated and prepared, I could hold my breath for about 3 minutes. That's a long time. 3 minutes. Try to hold your breath for 3 minutes. I know nowadays I can't, but that back then when I was young and strong and best of health, but but 15 to 18 minutes, um, so when they would say, what was going on? What happened? I would say, oh, Neptune spit me back. I got really good at hiding, the experience.
Here ends part one of our extraordinary two-part interview with David Bennett. In next week's conclusion, you'll learn how Dave returned to the light, practices entering the light at will, and how he assists others to do the same. My thanks to Dave Bennett for sharing the details of his amazingly spiritual life story. If you enjoyed this show, I strongly recommend you pick up a copy of his excellent book, Voyage of Purpose. If you'd like to hear this show again or any of our more than 500 archived ad-free NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or go to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can subscribe to and comment on the complete NDE Radio library. And be sure to check out our NDE Radio Facebook page. Just search NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app. And listen next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.